Hi, I'm Dave Grady from Verizon Security Solutions team.
And I'm here today with John Grimm, Head of Research, Development, and Innovation at Verizon's Threat Research Advisory Center, or the VTRAC. Today, John is here to help us learn a little bit about a new report that's coming out in November, the Cyber-Espionage report. So let's just jump into this new report. How does this report define cyber-espionage? What is it?
Absolutely, Dave. First off, happy to be here with the audience today to talk about this very exciting project. Specifically, why was this such an interesting project? Well, nothing gets people more excited than espionage. And for years, we've been doing investigations in terms of data breaches and cybersecurity incidents. And these type of threat actors or these type of attacks tend to be the most perplexing or the most challenging in terms of investigating, responding, and by extension, defending and detecting in general. So the DBIR, the Data Breach Investigations Report, defines cyber-espionage as espionage enabled via unauthorized network or system access. It largely constitutes nation states or state-affiliated actors looking for sensitive and proprietary information. So in essence, if you have a company out there and you have anything that's sensitive or proprietary, you can be a target of cyber-espionage. So again, these are a unique challenge, these types of investigations dealing with these type of breaches. And what's happening there in terms of the threat actors? Well, they're using advanced techniques, they have a specific focus, and they're looking to swiftly gain access to heavily defended environments. In addition, depending on their goals, they're moving laterally through the network, they're looking to obtain targeted access and data and exit without being detected, or they stay back and maintain a covert persistence in terms of their place in that environment that they've been able to breach into. So that's what we're looking at in terms of cyber-espionage, Dave.
Got it. So, it was interesting because in the beginning of the report, you mentioned that the team that does the investigations at Verizon, you and your team, you've conducted, quote, all sorts of investigations into cybersecurity incidents and data breaches over the years. None has been more challenging or perplexing than cyber-espionage. So if it's challenging for folks who do this 24 hours a day, year after year, it's going to be particularly challenging for cybersecurity folks who are busy doing lots of other things. And the report is really designed to help you understand both the problems or the challenge as well as the solutions to fighting against cyber espionage. So John, why don't you walk us through some of the high-level findings in the report as a preview?
Absolutely. Let me give you a real quick, though, overview of what the report is. So if you're a fan of the Data Breach Investigations Report, it is one of the 9 incident classification patterns that we cover within the DBIR. So this year, in terms of a deep dive, we wanted to look at this actual incident classification pattern and see what the data tells us, the data from all of the contributors to the DBIR, plus our insight from doing cyber espionage breach investigations within the VTRAC team. So we looked at 7 years of DBIR data, 2014 to 2020 in terms of the DBIR itself. And we looked at DBIR data from the standpoint of cyber espionage breaches for that 7-year period, as well as all breaches for that 7-year period. And we used that as a compare and contrast within the report to help illustrate and highlight the differences in terms of cyber espionage breaches versus all breaches. So specifically, we look at targeted victims, the attributes, assets, and data they target, and we also look at the threat actors in terms of their tactics, techniques, and procedures. And most importantly, we provide solutions or insight in terms of how to prevent and mitigate these attacks, or how to better detect and better respond to these attacks. So I think your question, Dave, was what are we seeing in terms of the victim organizations? Mm-hmm. This is what we're seeing here in Figure 16 and Figure 17 in terms of the industries. I do want to point out, though, that if you are in an industry or any industry that has sensitive or proprietary information, you can be a victim of cyber espionage threat actors. In particular, if you look at the graphics here, you'll see these are the top industries within our data set that are impacted by cyber espionage attacks. Okay, so this year's DBIR, we looked at 16 different industries. So we looked at those 16 in addition to other industries for the cyber espionage report. And of those 16, we came up with 7 that had the most impact in terms of dealing with these cyber threat actors. And you can see here in Figure 17, top industries are public, manufacturing, and professional. And then in figure 17, what we did was we looked at that 7-year period for cyber espionage breaches within all breaches within select industries. So we looked at the selected industry first, manufacturing, for example. We looked at all breaches for that 7-year period, 985. And then within manufacturing all breaches, we looked at the number of cyber espionage breaches. And you can see that's 344. So in terms of impact, that's 35% of breaches that manufacturing is dealing with is cyber espionage. Okay, so this is figure 29 and figure 30 of the report. So again, 7-year period that we're looking at. Figure 29, the green bars indicate cyber espionage breaches throughout the report, by the way. And the blue bars in figure 30 indicate all breaches throughout the report, by the way. So the one thing I wanted to kind of show folks here in terms of the data is there is a big difference between cyber espionage versus all breaches. And keep in mind, for all breaches, those are dominated by a financial motive. Okay, that is the number one motive that we see in the DBIR. The second highest motive would be cyber espionage, but it is a distant second in terms of the DBIR. So what we're looking here is all breaches, keep in mind financial motive dominates it, versus cyber espionage breaches. So for the all breaches in figure 30, we see a bit of a difference in terms of the data that's being targeted by these threat actors. So you see the credentials there. So let's move credentials off to the side here. But there's your personal data, 31%, payment, 23%, and medical at 13%. This is your PII, your PCI, and your PHI, which happen to be regulated data types in terms of reporting requirements. When you look at cyber espionage in figure 29, you see a bit of a different type of data set here. We've got secrets at 75%, internal data at 30%. Again, there's your credentials, let's set that aside. System information at 19% and classified at 9%. So this is, generally speaking, unregulated data. So the threat actors that are involved in cyber espionage are targeting this data that doesn't require, generally speaking, reporting that it's been breached. Okay, so that is one factor to take into consideration in terms of the data from the DBIR is the contributors to the DBIR reporting the data that they collect, and it's being reported. And a lot of that is data that's associated with mandatory reporting requirements, such as GDPR, for example, okay, or the healthcare industry, for example. Whereas when we're looking at unregulated data, there's no mandatory reporting requirements for that, so it's very possible it's not being collected or being reported, and by extension, it's not hitting our data set. Furthermore, if you want to kind of look at things from the standpoint of compliance and looking for that data that you need to report, your tools, your solutions, your monitoring may be focused on the personal, the payment, and medical, and may not be as focused on the secrets, the internal, and the systems. So you may not be detecting it because you're not looking for it, for example. Plus, you throw in there, cyber espionage threat actors tend to be more sophisticated. They're looking to avoid detection to begin with and avoid response as well. So they may not be detected as much as the other types of threat actors, and by extension, not reported because of that reason.
Yeah, that's a really interesting distinction, and it's probably drives a lot of the narrative in the report about what you need to do to improve that visibility, right? To understand what your assets are, what you need to protect, and where to look, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll talk about it here in a little bit as we look at timelines and discovery and how organizations are finding out about cyber espionage. But before I go there, I wanted to point out within the cyber espionage report, we do the same kind of thing as we did with the DBIR. We look at the 20 Center for Internet Security critical security controls, and we determine which ones are most relevant for cyber espionage. For the DBIR, we picked 9 out of 20 that we felt were most relevant with this year's findings. For the cyber espionage report, we picked 12 out of 20. And what you're seeing in the bottom left-hand corner of the data slide here is those particular critical security controls that are most relevant to cybersecurity surrounding data protection, for example. So this is timelines, okay? And this particular timeline is actually 2 timelines from the standpoint of what the attacker is doing, what the cyber espionage threat actors are doing, and what all breach threat actors are doing. So figure 6 and figure 7 show the first timeline here, and this is time to compromise. Left side for figure 6 in green is time to compromise for cyber espionage breaches. And the right side is time to compromise for all breaches. Okay, and what you're seeing here is it takes seconds to days, generally speaking, for cyber espionage breach threat actors to operate in terms of compromising the initial enterprise environment. For all breaches, it takes seconds to minutes. But when we look at time to exfiltration, we see a little bit of a different dynamic here in Figure 8 and Figure 9. On the left-hand side, we're seeing minutes to weeks, generally speaking, for cyber espionage breaches. And for all breaches, we're seeing seconds to days. So it's rather quick for all breaches. And for cyber espionage breaches, you can see that it's, generally speaking, a longer timeline in terms of the threat actor activities. You want me to move to the next slide, Dave?
Yeah, so that's what we mean when we say, is it slow and low or low and slow? Which is the right way to say that?
I kind of think both of them are appropriate. So I kind of mix them up because essentially the threat actors, cyber espionage threat actors have the time to do this, and they are very patient. So they can get themselves in the environment and they can sit in there and wait for the opportunity that they're looking for.
Yeah, I remember in the 2020 DBIR, we did see a significant improvement in time to detection from the 2019 report, but it's still a significant number. I think it's well over 25% take months or even longer to detect. And that's a long time for bad guys to be running around network, particularly sophisticated ones, as you said. So tell me what's going on here. What are we looking at now?
It's exactly what you just said, Dave. So for Figure 10 and Figure 11 here, this is defender-related activities in terms of detection or time to discovery, and Figure 12 and Figure 13 is defender-related activities in terms of time to containment. So what you're seeing here on the left side, Figure 10, is the cyber espionage threat actors. In terms of discovering them, it's taking months to years. In fact, 39% of the time, it's taken years. So it's an awful long time for a threat actor to dwell in the environment. Whereas if you look in Figure 11, you can see there that it's days to months for all breaches. In fact, just 12% for years. So to kind of put into perspective, all breaches, again, are dominated by financial motives, right? So somewhere, sometime, somehow, someone's going to be missing the money, right? The financial motive, and there's going to be an investigation, okay? Maybe it's not the victim organization, maybe it's fraud analysis, maybe it's law enforcement or a business partner, but someone's going to be missing the money. Whereas in Figure 10, the months and years, nobody may be looking for that unregulated data. There's possibly and likely no monetary motive that's involved. It's purely espionage, looking for specific data, and so no one's going to be missing it if it's gone, right? We've seen situations where we've done investigations and found out that these cyber espionage threat actors have been in the environment for months, for years, and nobody knew that they were there. And the only way they were detected is either threat hunting or a similar product that organization was creating was released by a competitor half a world away. And it was way too late then to do anything about it.
I found that. I'm sorry, Joe. I found that really interesting. I found that really interesting when I was reading the report, that one of the indicators is I would say sudden, but the realization that we've lost market share, or that there is a sudden competitive advantage that we've lost. And it's interesting to understand that it's not always the bells and whistles that tell you you've been compromised when it comes to cyber espionage. So I'm sorry, go on. Tell us more about these.
No, that's a good point. I was just going to round things off here with the timeline here. With this fourth timeline, Figure 12 and 13 is time to containment. It's a little bit more in line, cyber espionage versus all breaches with each other. You can see here, we're talking days to months generally, and then hours to weeks for all breaches. But let me move into a little bit more detail here in terms of discovery. And I think these two figures say a lot, Figure 31 and Figure 32, okay, in terms of discovery methods. So again, same 7-year period. The bottom is all breaches, right? And when we look at who's discovering all breaches, it's law enforcement, fraud detection, and customers, okay? So these are, generally speaking, outside the organization unless it's internal fraud detection. Again, somebody's probably missing the money. But when we look at Figure 31 for cyber espionage breaches, we see different discovery methods, generally speaking. We see at 48%, half the time, it's suspicious traffic that's discovering cyber espionage threat actors. And then we see antivirus, and then we see the emergency response team or the CERT team that's discovering it. So if we kind of think about the timelines and how it takes months or years for cyber espionage, no one outside the organization, generally speaking, is detecting that breach. It's internal assets, the suspicious traffic, the antivirus, the CERT team that's discovering it, but they're discovering it, much further gone down the road compared to all breaches. So just kind of different, kind of interesting to see this. And it really is important to, to have trained folks with security tools that can capture and analyze that traffic in terms of suspiciousness. I think you were going to say something, Dave?
No, just agreeing. And again, the report maps to the critical security controls that can help you combat this risk, this challenge here. What's on the next slide here?
Yeah, let's move on to the next slide. So for fans of the DBIR, you'll know that the DBIR underlying it is the Veris framework. It's how we collect the data, how we code the data, what we use to query against to build out every DBIR for every year. We've done it for 13 years. And one of the primary aspects or components of the Veris framework, which is underlies the DBIR, is the vocabulary for event recording and information sharing or incident sharing, is the A4 threat model. Okay, so this is a way of looking at the threat actors and what they're doing. Okay, and I've got some references here, veriscommunity.net, as well as our github.com website if you're interested in learning more about Veris and the A4 threat model. But for the next few slides, I'm going to frame them with the A4 threat model in mind. So the first A of A4 threat is actors, whose actions affected the assets. And then we've got another A with attributes, how were assets affected. And then we've got another A here with actions, what actions affected the asset. And then the final A is assets, which assets were affected. Okay, let me kind of show you here in terms of actors, and this is probably no surprise to folks with this first A for the A4 threat model, that for cyber espionage threat actors, the top threat actors are state affiliated at 85% and nation state at 8%. So if you were to combine those, that's 93%. That's 9 out of 10 of these threat actors are associated with a nation state or working for that nation state. Whereas for all breaches, a different type of threat actor here at the top, and that's the organized crime at 59%. Again, a lot of times their motivation is financial. So a bit of a difference here in terms of who the threat actors are for this first A of the 4 A's in the A4 threat model. Okay, let's move to the second A, their actions. So within the DBIR and within Veris, we have 7 high-level action types, okay? And on the right-hand side in the blue, on figure 40, you see actions within breaches: hacking, malware, social error, misuse, physical, and environmental. The takeaway here is these threat actors are using different actions more so than the cyber espionage threat actors. So if you look on the left side with the green bars, you see primarily the cyber espionage threat actors are using 3 actions: malware, social, and hacking. And all 3 of those are above 80%, by the way. So there's, a very few number of actions that the threat actors are using for cyber espionage versus mainly 6 of the 7 actions for all breaches. All right, next one, attributes. The third of the 4 A's. So this is your CIA triad, your confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So in figure 20, left-hand side, 7-year period, cyber espionage breaches. Figure 21, right-hand side, all breaches, 7-year period. The top 2 compromised attribute varieties are software installation and altered behavior for both cyber espionage and all breaches. But if you look at the percentages, you can see for cyber espionage, for both of those top 2 categories, they're over twice as much percentage-wise as their, the comparison there on the right-hand side with all breaches. So that's interesting. And then you see in terms of confidentiality, there's 2 secrets and internal next for cyber espionage. But we've got credentials, and then we've got personal, and then we've got payment for all breaches. So this kind of goes into what we covered earlier with the data types and the regulated data types versus non-regulated data types. The other takeaway that we saw when we looked at the data initially was for compromised attribute varieties, there's more of a spreading around of that in terms of all breaches. But for cyber espionage, clearly the top 3 are clearly the top three: software installation, alter behavior, and the secrets there.
Okay, now what that means we have assets next.
Assets are next. Okay, so this is assets. Looking at 7-year period and 1-year period. So figure 24 and figure 25 are 7 years for cyber espionage breaches and all breaches. And then figure 22 and figure 23 with the kind of faded green and the faded blue are the 1-year time frame for cyber espionage and all breaches respectively. So I wanted to point this out here, figure 22 and 23 in particular, because what we're seeing here is, well, first off, let me talk about the 7-year period. Desktop or laptop and desktop and then mobile phone are the top three in terms of cyber espionage when it comes to assets. When it comes to all breaches, you see desktop and laptop, but you see web application server there, and then you see desktop, point of sale controller, point of sale terminal. So there's a lot more spreading around of assets for the 7-year period for all breaches. When we look at the insets here in terms of figure 22 and figure 23, and figure 22 in particular, wanted to point out there that the number 2 compromised asset varieties for the 2020 DBIR is mobile phone at 14%. So we're seeing that move up to 14% versus the 7-year period at 9%. So this is showing how the cyber espionage threat actors can target end users, not just on their desktop or laptop, but they're starting to target them on their mobile devices.
Imagine we'd see that number grow in the next year as more and more people are working remotely. So John, in the interest of time, the report and this presentation has really given a lot of insight into the scope and the depth of this problem. It's real. It's not just the stuff of bad movies. Cyber espionage is real. Can you help us understand, though, the so what's next for security practitioners now that they have this report, again, available November 17 from the Verizon site? What can they do with this information?
Absolutely. So I already kind of mentioned one of the things they can use in terms of tools and what they can do for a way forward, and that's leveraging the Center for Internet Security Critical Security Controls, and in particular, the 12 out of 20 that we identified. We also have the Veris, which is, again, underlies the DBIR, mapped to the findings in this report and mapped to those critical security controls. So I realize this is an eye chart, but the point here is on the left-hand side, if you're using Veris or if you want to adopt Veris, these are the high-level categories that we have within the report. The next column over are the key takeaways from the cyber espionage report that relates to those Veris categories. The middle column is the top CIS critical security controls that map to those findings. And then finally, on the very right-hand side, we've deduplicated all of those critical security controls to those top 12 that you see on the right-hand side. And I'll show you these in a better slide here. So these are those top critical security controls. So within those controls, there are sub-controls that can help you better situate yourself to not only defend against these cyber espionage threat actors, but also be able to detect them and detect not just from a react mode, but also threat hunt and find them in your environment, to detect and respond to them, and put yourself in a better place in terms of your overall security, in terms of protecting your proprietary information, your sensitive information, your secrets, your internal data. So these are the 12. This is the way forward in terms of what you can do to leverage an established framework with the Veris framework to help build out your cyber defenses.
Well, again, John, this is a real service to the community and folks who do this every day for a living. I want to give a shout out to you and your team. In addition to the reports that we mentioned and this new cyber espionage report, John and his team have also put together in the past an insider threat report and a report on incident preparedness and readiness and response readiness. Those and other reports from Verizon are available in the virtual booth here at the CSS. So we want to encourage you to come by and check out some of those assets. In the virtual booth, we also have some demos for some of the capabilities that help you fight these kind of threats. So we want to invite you into the booth, mix and mingle with some of our staff virtually. I just want to thank you, John, and thank our viewers for stopping by. Thank you.